Guys, well, it's official. Google is guilty of running an illegal monopoly. Now, if you weren't already aware, there has been a big antitrust case against Google LLC for quite some time now. It started back in 2023 by the Biden administration DOJ, and it has now been continued on by the Trump administration's DOJ. And, well, it's official. They've gone out and said that, yep, they're guilty of running an illegal monopoly. Google is illegal. Their practices are illegal. And what does this mean? Well, we could see Google becoming a very, very different company very, very fast. So we're going to go ahead and cover it in today's video. Let's get right into it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start off by giving you guys a little bit of background before we get into the breaking news. So, long story short, the federal antitrust case brought against Google by the DOJ on January 24th, 2023, accuses Google of illegally monopolizing the AdTech market, or advertising technology market, in violations of Section 1 and 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Basically saying, hey, you are way too big, you are doing practices that are illegal, and make it so that competition is really, really, really difficult. You aren't being anti-competitive. So what they're saying is basically, you have way too big of an advertising market. You need to not be as big anymore. Now, if you aren't already aware, Google has a very, very big advertising market. They have Google Ads, Google AdWords, there's AdSense. They have 1,000,001 different platforms for you to advertise on. One of them is also YouTube, which is where you're watching me on right now. That's a part of their advertising market. Google offers a lot of ads. If you want your thing to be advertised, the first people you go to is Google. Heck, even for a certain amount of time, they did stuff in the radio and TV market. They don't anymore, but they even used to be as big as that, where they were handling radio and TV. They are a genuinely big company, especially when it comes to advertising, especially internet advertising. And the US government is basically saying, you are too big, you need to sell off portions of your ad tech business and cease certain types of practices. So, with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and look at this Wall Street Journal article. Judge rules Google operates a legal ad monopoly. They are guilty. So Google created a monopoly that allowed it to control parts of the online advertising industry, a federal judge ruled on Thursday. A decision that could upend one of the technology giant's core businesses. So the ruling marked the second time in 8 months that a US judge labeled Google an illegal monopolist. Because this isn't the only antitrust suit that's going on Google. Google also had another lawsuit that said they're too big of a search engine. Basically, Google is getting upended extremely, extremely fast, which, long story short, means Google's not going to be the same. They've been ruled a way too big of a search engine and way too big of an ad tech business, which, long story short, Google's never going to be the same after this. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, Google the search engine might not be Google the search engine anymore. It could very well be sold, because there's that other lawsuit that's going on that said they have a monopoly on internet search, and they've been ruled accordingly as such. It has been ruled that yes, they have a monopoly in internet search, and they need to sell off certain parts of their business. These parts of their business could be a variety of different things. It could be the Google search engine, it could be Google Chrome, it could be their Google search ads. In terms of their ad tech business, that could definitely, the ads are kind of Google's main business model. They really are. So, long story short, if they also have to sell off some of their ad business, everything else goes crumbling with it. YouTube is not going to be the same, probably. I mean, if they have to sell their ad tech business, then that also means they probably have to sell YouTube along with it, because the only reason YouTube survives is because ads. Creators get paid with ads, and heck, I want to get paid with ads too. That's part of the reason why I make YouTube videos. Also, just because I like talking about these things in general. So that's going to affect YouTube as well. YouTube might get handed off to some other company alongside, which is genuinely a big deal. Um, it these two cases, these two antitrust cases, are really going to change how Google as a company operates. And that's weird. It's especially weird because they're such an important company on a day to day. They're kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, too big to fail. We use them every day. If you have a phone and it's not an iPhone, chances are you are using a Google product. You're using Android. Android is a Google product. Google makes Android. Google makes the Google Play Store. Google makes Google Search, Google makes YouTube, Google makes Gmail, Google makes all of these things. They make so many things that are important to our day to day lives that we've gotten used to. But obviously, they've become way too big. They're genuinely humongous. They're a big company. And even though they're too big to fail, well, we said the same thing about AT&T back in 1983 with the Bell system, and look how that ended up. Now we have multiple other carriers instead of one telephone company that rules the entire country. It's most likely, and this is my opinion, I don't know what's actually going to happen to Google here, but this is my opinion. I think Google's going to get split up because there's no way of, since there's two different cases going on, there's no way that Google is going to remain an individual entity anymore. Their ad tech business is going to get sold to somebody else. And alongside that, probably YouTube, because YouTube relies entirely on the premise of Google's ad tech business. If Google's ad tech business goes away, then YouTube does. Because there's going to be no incentive to make videos on the platform, and there's going to be no incentive for Google to host them because they're not getting paid because, there's no more ads anymore. Google's not getting paid, the creators aren't going to get paid, YouTube goes along with it. So, my guess is that the ad tech business is going to be sold probably along with YouTube, unless it's only certain parts of the ad tech business, which could happen. Google may retain some of its ad tech business, and some other parts of it may go off to some other companies, or maybe it'll spin into its own company, which has happened before in antitrust cases. Again, see AT&T versus the DOJ in 1983. Um, However, in regards to the search engine, Google may very well lose it. They might, and they also might lose Google Chrome. Um, Specifically because in that case, they've pointed out that they have way too big of a monopoly on the search engine market, and that they add their search engine into every browser. They have their own browser, and it's like the biggest browser, and that browser uses the Google search engine, and all of these things. And the DOJ needs to figure out some way of breaking it up and making it so that the market is fair again. But you have to wonder, how do you make a market fair when the market is so heavily reliant on the monopoly? You Everybody uses Google. Even if you use some alternate search engines, you occasionally go on Google. Even if you don't use Google Chrome, you go on Google. Most web browsers use Google by default. I use an iPhone. I use Safari web browser. Safari uses Google by default. I use Firefox. Firefox uses Google by default. I can use Firefox on like a Linux laptop, not running Windows or Mac OS or anything. I can go the full open source route. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be Google. That's what's always the default. So it's a big search engine. They have a big user base, and they pay to keep themselves default everywhere. We rely on it. So you have to wonder, how do you break up something that is so heavily relied on? Google as a business is kind of important. I mean, we all use Gmail. We all have Gmail accounts for our email. We all use Google Search. We all use YouTube. I mean, heck, I would go as far as saying nobody really watches conventional TV anymore. Everybody watches YouTube. You might use YouTube Music. You might use all of these litany of different Google products. You might have a phone that runs Android, and Android's made by Google, and you use the Google Play Store, and you use the Google search engine on that Google phone, maybe Google Chrome on that Google phone. Everything's Google. How do you break up something when it's so relied on? It's a genuine question. And it's going to vastly change our internet landscape. It's not going to be the same. It's just, it's not. Now, we'll go back to the article for a second, because admittedly, Google, or the parent company of Google, Alphabet, is planning to appeal the ruling. I mean, go figure. Of course they're going to. I think they also tried to appeal the ruling that happened against them that said that they were a search engine monopoly too. Now, whether or not those appeals are going to actually go anywhere, unlikely, because by the definition of the law, they're a monopoly. They are. Whether we like to admit it or not, Google's too big for its own good. For our own good. The issue then becomes, though, how do you break it up? Because it's so heavily relied on. Google should not be as big as it is. I'll go out and say it. But we all rely on it regardless. How do you break something like that up? How? It's difficult. And it is going to change how we use the internet. And it is definitely going to, depending on how they do it, just absolutely destroy Google as a company. It very well might. It genuinely might. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, nothing yet. Nothing yet. It's not going to mean anything for the common person until actual decisions are made as to what's going to happen to Google. That's when it might start meaning more. That's when it might start becoming more important. As far as I would assume, though, I think the common person would be fairly unaffected. They just have to get used to different brands. There'll still be a search engine for them to use. Google might be renamed to something else, but it'll still be the same search engine, probably just under a different name, under different ownership. Same goes for YouTube. If that might change hands. If you're running ads on Google's AdTech businesses, then you're probably going to have to switch providers and stuff like that. But these are all probablys. We still have to see what the courts are going to order, because we don't really know yet. Now, do we? Because, well, honestly, no, we don't know yet. That's going to take some time to figure out. It's not going to be an instant thing. But what I do know is that Google's probably never going to be the same. They probably won't be, because for as big of a company as they are, they can't really fight this. They're a monopoly. You know it. I know it. Any American who's used their services, or anybody in the world who's used their services, knows it. They're too big. They're way too big. They dominate every part of our internet lives effectively. And, well, they kind of do have to be broken up. But again, that raises the question, how do you do something like that? I don't know. If you want to leave your opinion on this in the comments down below, please do. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it, especially considering it's such a dicey situation. Something that we, again, rely so heavily on is going to be effectively just slashed and cut into different pieces. It's going to be kind of disorienting, to be honest. That is about it for today's video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. I'd love to have a little bit of conversation about this because, again, honestly, I think this is interesting. Like, comment, subscribe, take care, you guys, and remember to stay safe out there.